This, for me, is one of the few holy grails in life because to me the Haunted Mansion is the most precious real estate on earth. We are not making it a comedy. We are making it into an e-ticket ride. We're going to make it scary and fun at the same time. But the scary will be scary. And to me, the mansion has to become the haunted house movie that a generation remembers and loves after being created by us.
That is one big pile of shit.
I've loved the Haunted Mansion attraction at Disneyland for literally as long as I can remember. It was my favorite ride as a kid. Its dark mystery and whimsical creepiness fascinated me, and it still holds a special place in my heart today. That love and fascination would play a pivotal role in my eventual love of horror movies. For many, the Haunted Mansion ride acted as what is affectionately referred to as gateway horror, a way for kids to be introduced to darker stories and ideas while still providing a sense of fun and whimsy. Think The Nightmare Before Christmas, Beetlejuice, or Coraline. After it was announced in 2010 that Guillermo del Toro will write and direct a new Haunted Mansion film for Disney, I was incredibly intrigued, as Del Toro's style seemed to gel perfectly with the source material. Also, at the time, he had spent 2 years of pre-production on his doomed adaptation of The Hobbit, and just 2 months prior to his announcement, he had stepped away from those films due to extensive delays. Del Toro being rewarded from that debacle with a chance to play in the sandbox of one of his favorite properties was incredibly exciting. Guillermo del Toro is just about as big of a Haunted Mansion fanatic as you possibly can be, with a lifelong influence dating back to when he first experienced the ride during its opening in 1969 when he was just 4 years old. This influence would help shape the creativity and macabre style of his films. He dedicated an entire section of his bleak house home to the Haunted Mansion, filling it with memorabilia from the ride and covering the walls of the room in the original wallpaper from the attraction. A crucial part of his announcement in 2010 was that his film would feature the inclusion of the Hatbox Ghost, a character that only existed for the first few months of the ride's history due to its constant malfunctioning. In the fall of 1969, the Hatbox Ghost was permanently removed, and it wouldn't be until 2015 that the iconic character would finally return to the mansion. 2 years after his announcement, Del Toro submitted his final screenplay draft to Disney, ready to begin production with the intent of making the film PG-13. And that's when things began to stall out. 1 year after that, Del Toro announced he would no longer direct, and would now only serve as co-writer and executive producer. 2 years later, Ryan Gosling was in talks to star in the film. The project stalled in development hell for another 5 years, and a full decade after that initial announcement, Del Toro's association with the film came to an end, with Disney saying that his vision was too scary for kids. Unfortunately, the closest audiences will likely ever get to stepping into Del Toro's Haunted Mansion is the 2015 gothic horror film Crimson Peak, starring Tom Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain. This is a beautifully shot and gorgeously atmospheric period horror film. The inspiration derived from the mansion is palpable, and in it you can see his unique take on ghosts, which was likely to be a very similar design to what would have been lurking within the walls of the Haunted Mansion. If you're curious about visiting what might have been, I'd recommend checking this one out. Once Del Toro exited the project, I completely forgot about the upcoming Haunted Mansion film, and it wasn't until late last year that I was reminded of its impending existence. Disney hired relative newcomer Justin Simien to direct, who used to be a cast member at Disneyland. I still had a naive sense of optimism about the film, and was hopeful that Disney would right the wrongs of the 2003 Eddie Murphy version. Haunted Mansion is the story of Gabby and her son Travis, who move into their new home in New Orleans, only to discover that the mansion is haunted, and they must enlist the help of several local paranormal specialists to get rid of the spirits. From the very beginning, the film can't really decide what tone it wants to be. and therefore it really isn't much of anything. The acting in the film is all over the place, with far and away the best performance coming from Lakeith Stanfield as Ben, who has established himself as a genuinely great actor. He's consistently versatile and nuanced in every role he chooses. However, it does feel like he's starring in a different film than the one that we're seeing. Maybe the filmmakers completely switched gears when they got into the editing room, but his performance is simply clashing with the rest of the film's goofy tone. The worst performance in the film is Tiffany Haddish as Harriet, who I thought was incredibly miscast. She too seemed like she was in a different movie, but unlike Lakeith Stanfield, who was actually bringing weight and depth to his performance, Haddish seems to be completely one note, and I couldn't take any of her brief, dramatic scenes seriously. And it's not like she is untalented. Her performance in the film The Card Counter was subtle, nuanced, and overall very memorable. The rest of the actors are mostly fine, with Owen Wilson and Danny DeVito seeming like they were phoning it in pretty much the entire movie. Seemingly the only thing to survive Guillermo del Toro's involvement was the inclusion of the Hatbox Ghost as the main villain of the film. Unfortunately, just like the vast majority of the effects in the movie, it is an entirely CGI creation, and it looks absolutely terrible. I was genuinely shocked and confused that the audience was supposed to find this antagonist threatening. The end result looks cartoony, fake, and I never once was immersed into seeing anything other than a digital creation. Jared Leto plays the Hatbox Ghost, and not only is it an entirely CGI character, they also altered the pitch of his voice to a distractingly low level, leaving virtually none of Leto's performance on the screen. To be fair, there were some prosthetics used in the film, but they didn't look great either. The movie just felt cheap, which is insane given the $157 million production budget. I simply do not know where that money went. Speaking of money, like virtually every Disney film these days, the marketing budget was a staggering $150 million. And with all that money, Disney couldn't even be bothered to make the trailers or posters stand out, or at the very least, be intriguing. One of the strangest things I noticed in the marketing was with Daniel Levy, who was not just featured in the trailers, but he was credited by name in them. Bizarrely, when he actually shows up at the end of the film, he's in it for one scene, for literally less than a minute. Disney decided to release this Halloween movie at the end of July, which seems like a baffling decision. From a marketing perspective, however, it's clear that they wanted to double dip by taking advantage of the summer movie audience and then releasing the film on Blu-ray and Disney Plus in October, trying to maximize their potential profit. Unfortunately, this strategy completely failed, whether due to the ill-timed release 1 week after Barbie and Oppenheimer, or the overall abysmal marketing campaign. Haunted Mansion is on its way to becoming a massive box office loss for Disney. It's completely normal for films to feature some form of product placement. By featuring products in movies, it can help cut costs and seems like a harmless trade-off when the products are seen sparingly and don't detract from the plot of the film. Haunted Mansion has some of the most egregious product placement I've ever seen. Characters are making quippy one-liners about CVS and Amazon, which actually seem harmless in comparison to the end of the film when Owen Wilson and Lakeith Stanfield decide to stop at Burger King for literally no reason other than to hold the fry container which says Burger King directly towards the camera. Then there's a scene where Ben is giving a heartfelt monologue about the death of his wife, giving a genuinely good performance, explaining that on the day of her death, his wife stopped for ice cream. But that's not descriptive enough. He then has to pause awkwardly to shoehorn in that his wife actually stopped to get Baskin Robbins. I don't think I've rolled my eyes that hard in a very long time. I was genuinely invested during that part of the film. I was actually thinking that this was a great character moment for Ben, until the movie grinds to a halt to plug Baskin Robbins. Are you f***ing kidding me? When the product placement in your film is so glaring that it takes precedence over your main character's emotional arc, and therefore your audience's emotional investment in the movie, you have a very big problem on your hands. One thing I thought was interesting is that Gabby and Travis both dress like they're straight out of the 1960s, and it seemed like too strong of a choice to just be a costume decision. And this isn't a one-off. Practically every piece of clothing Gabby wears is period, And for the first few minutes, I was questioning if this was a period piece, which would have made a lot more sense thematically, but it became clear that the film was meant to take place in modern day. Everyone else was dressed relatively modern, except Gabby and Travis. Then I was thinking it would be great if when Gabby and Travis first arrived in the mansion, it was actually 1969, the year the ride opened, and when we get to the end of the film, we realize that Gabby and Travis can't leave the mansion because they died the first night that they arrived there. They've spent the past 50 years trying fruitlessly to get help, not realizing that they're 2 of the 999 souls trapped there all along. But nope, they're just 2 regular people. And that 1960s costume decision is simply never explained or acknowledged. One of the most frustrating elements of the film was the clear insistence to incorporate literally everything from the ride into the movie. And I mean everything. Instead of creating a compelling narrative, Disney seemed to want to force the audience to understand why everything is exactly the way it is in the ride and have it be overly explained to the point of annoyance. There were moments that felt organic, like the inclusion of the stretching room or the dueling ghosts, but the need to have Tiffany Haddish be suddenly banished by a ghost for no reason, just so her chair, which looks exactly like a doom buggy, can be dragged frontwards and backwards through the mansion, was so pointless. It felt like the tie-ins to the ride became the motivating factor in almost every decision. Now, just like the product placement, I understand that Disney wants their audience to make certain connections, and they want fans to visit their parks. Those tie-ins can be fun when done in a less over-the-top and obvious way. You can make a film that stands just fine on its own 2 feet, and still have callbacks and Easter eggs for fans to discover and appreciate. Overall, the film seems to take no risks at all, constantly choosing to play everything as calculated and safe as humanly possible. In comparison to the safety blanket that this film was wrapped in, let's look at another Disney film, for example. One of the biggest risks Disney ever took was the live-action adaptation of another beloved theme park ride, Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. Disney hired the director of horror movie The Ring, Gore Verbinski, and gave him surprisingly free rein to carry out his vision, which included an actual dark tone mixed with very weird humor and a now iconic performance from Johnny Depp. During filming, producers were scared out of their minds that Depp was going to ruin the film with his bizarre performance, and they were convinced the movie was going to be a massive flop. But Depp and Verbinski were ultimately unshaken from their vision, and the risks taken resulted in the start of one of the most successful and iconic franchises in film history. Flash forward 20 years, and we get the complete opposite of that. A safe, inoffensive horror comedy that is not daring enough to actually be funny, and ironically, too afraid to be scary. Disney had an incredible opportunity to collaborate with an Academy Award-winning filmmaker whose unique Gothic style was literally shaped by the Haunted Mansion itself. Instead of taking what they considered to be a risk, they decided to play it depressingly safe, and just make the film a comedy again, and an unfunny one at that. Any attempts to make the film actually scary, or have any kind of lasting impact, are muted by the constant undercut of jokes, and its attempt at an emotional core never resonates beyond surface level. While it certainly isn't the worst movie ever made, far from it, the most damning thing I can say about it is it's simply forgettable. This is a film that, contrary to Del Toro's enthusiastic intentions, will hardly be remembered at all. Perhaps only mentioned in articles referencing how, because of how calculated and safe Disney played it, it's unfortunately destined to become one of the biggest box office bombs of all time. And I give Haunted Mansion a 4.5 out of 10. This will go down as easily one of the biggest missed opportunities in the history of Hollywood. I still love the Haunted Mansion attraction, and I'm not giving up hope. Who knows? Maybe in another decade, Disney will come to its senses and finally let Guillermo del Toro take audiences on his own ghastly tour through the Haunted Mansion.